the Indiana Pacers had a very good one, particularly Miles Turner went off in this game. Now, CA, I know you eat, sleep, and breathe these Dallas Mavericks. You make sure to keep an eye on them, and you've got a Dallas Mavericks crest right over your heart right now. What was your impression in a game that looked like for a good amount of time? I mean, we knew it was a good matchup. This is a stretch of games on the road that we knew were going to test this new looks Mavs teams. But they were playing this game fairly well, and it seemed to get away from them in the second half.
Yeah, it did. Indiana, by the way, for those who haven't been keeping up, Rick Carlisle's team, once again, very efficient on offense. They lead the NBA in scoring. So the Mavericks, who during this 7-game winning streak, were actually leading the NBA in defense. It's like, okay, this is going to be a good one. First half, Mavericks had the lead most of the game in the first half. But then Indiana started taking off, and it's like, look at this. And in the third quarter, it was the Miles Turner show. And Turner, again, anybody keeping up with his career when he was at Euless Trinity, and then he goes into the Indiana Pacers, and then he finds his way with Rick Carlisle, and Rick Carlisle has built a monster of a team. Who's the all-star in Indiana?
Tyrese Halliburton, point guard.
Let me tell you something. Indiana got a roster. So I'm looking at what was going on at the game, and I was like, oh, man, this is just a shame that in the fourth quarter, Kyrie got hot, and he couldn't get the ball. And Luka, by the way, in the first half, he scored 25 points. Second half, Rick Carlisle made some adjustments. Of course, Rick used to coach Luka, and he has major praise for Luka. Luka should be the MVP. He's doing amazing things this year, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, Luka, he just didn't have the same stuff that he used to have. But more importantly, the Mavericks could not get any assists. So that means other guys were not shooting the ball well. If you look at the plus minuses, the entire roster, nobody was a plus in the whole game.
Derek Lively was, but he's the only one.
He's the only one.
Yeah.
And he didn't play that many minutes because he's a rookie.
Yeah, and I mean that's the plus minus is, on the floor for positive minutes or negative minutes overall. And I mean, when it comes down to it, especially towards the second half or in the second half, you saw the Pacers really lay it on thick. And in the fourth quarter in particular as well, where they really, and I mean, they won the second quarter as well. So one thing that was very evident, the Pacers knocked down mid-range jumpers at a crazy clip. I think that they shot something like 14 of 18 from mid-range, where, they clearly gave the Mavericks hell in that way, particularly, and I mentioned Miles Turner and his season high 30 points. Because
and most of those in the third.
One thing that was evident, you mentioned Tyrese Halliburton. That is a guard that is very good at getting downhill, applying rim pressure. And so one thing that you've seen with these Mavs, we talked about how good it is that now they basically have 48 minutes of rim protection, right? They've got Lively, they've got Gafford, and in theory, you can have one of them on the floor at any time and make sure that you have the rim protected fairly comfortably, while also adding in Maxi Kleber, and he does a decent job of rim protection himself, even though he's 6'10" and maybe not necessarily a leaper in that same way. But with the way that Tyrese Halliburton gets downhill, the speed that this team operates at the Pacers, you could tell the Mavs wanted to make sure to have that rim protection, and you're sagging off of Miles Turner. That's a guy that can knock down shots and did in a big way in this game. But you mentioned the idea that there weren't a lot of assists, which means either the passes weren't getting around or the shots weren't being knocked down. And it really was a lot of the latter for these guys. Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving clearly did a lot of scoring. PJ Washington, 1 for 6, 0 for 3, and you could see that he was having a no good, very bad game.
This was not a good game for him at all. In fact, he came off of a stellar performance defensively against Kevin Durant against Phoenix on Thursday, and it wasn't translating. In fact, he had a couple of turnovers that were like, oh man, how did that happen? So it was like he was kind of discombobulated a little bit. Bottom line was, between some of the turnovers that the Mavericks were having, they actually were making their shots in the first half, but Indiana, man, you just have to say, Indiana was at home. They played well at home. The Mavericks could have stole the game in the fourth quarter. I'm looking at Kyrie because Kyrie started the fourth quarter. By the way, Kyrie did not have a good first half, but he generally just like, okay, let Luka do what he does in the first half. Kyrie is the fourth quarter. That's just what he does, and he couldn't get the ball in his hands. It's like, he started off, I think he made his first 4 shots in the road to bring the Mavericks back, and he didn't see it no more.
Yeah, man, you mentioned turnovers. Another person who contributed to these turnovers, Tim Hardaway Jr. had 4 turnovers, and that's a lot for a guy who you do not anticipate initiating offense, largely being a lot of a spot-up shooter. And so Jason Kidd, in his post-game press conference. I thought that this was interesting, and it really was a question that I was asking when I was watching the game with a few friends. I know that various other people around the Mavs were asking, and somebody asked Jason Kidd, about the importance of the third scorer and who that is on this team.
No, I think it's better when you have 4 or 5 guys who can go. Understanding PJ had great looks tonight. I thought Josh had good looks. Timmy has had good looks. We might have to try to get him, better looks, but he's had some looks that just haven't gone down here of late. We got to, get him going. But he's been one of the guys that's scored for us. Josh is scoring, and so again, PJ, Josh, or D-Live or Gap or centers, being able to play the pick and roll and get the lob or offensive rebounds for those guys too.
So basically, when asked, is it important to have a third guy that scores a lot? I mean, he was like, no, I'd rather have, a few other guys that can go. But in this instance, you have a few other guys in Josh Green, Tim Hardaway Jr., who shoots 4 of 12. So not only is he not making shots, he's kind of taking these up and not being great on defense and then turning the ball over. Just another bad game for him. And then, PJ Washington, who had a very off game. And you really need one of those guys to step up when you have Luka and Kyrie having a solid but maybe not like extraordinary day. And of course, that feels unfair when you look at Luka having a 33-6-6 evening, to not say that it's extraordinary. But yeah, I think this was one of the questions. And I think a lot of people looked at PJ Washington as a guy who you've seen him score 40 points in instances. But I do wonder, is Tim Hardaway Jr. still your third best scorer? And is that fine, considering that if he's not going, I don't think there's other ways to impact the game. We talk about this with youth players a lot, where it's like, all right, even if you're not shooting, find ways to impact the game otherwise. It doesn't feel like Tim has that, and he has not been great since the trade deadline, so that has put this team in kind of an awkward place, I think.
This is one of those situations where it's going to work itself out, and let me explain why.
Okay.
A lot of people were trying to judge the team before the trade, and they couldn't because of all the injuries.
Sure.
As these guys got healthier, you started finding out there's a lot of versatility. So as you want to have a quote-unquote traditional third scorer, the Mavericks are more versatile than that. It could be any of those guys, and that's a good thing. In other words, you're not counting on just Tim Hardaway Jr. to provide these points. In fact, Josh Green started looking like himself over the last couple of weeks. And guess what? He had been hurt. So what you're going to see when Dante Exum comes back tomorrow night, or whenever they're playing their next game, I want to say it's tomorrow night, whenever the next game is on the road, I think it's Cleveland tomorrow night. When he comes back, you're going to see a guy who's going to dribble the ball. He's going to be your third ball handler, which is more important because Tim Hardaway is not a ball handler.
Yeah.
He's a catch and shoot jump shot artist. And if he's on, guess what? You leave him in the game. If he's off, you got Josh Green, Dante Exum now. In other words, the versatility is there where Kidd didn't have that versatility in January. And when Tim Hardaway started the season to surprise everybody, like, man, he's so good. He's in a 6 Man of the Year conversation. Well, guess what? It was as a catch and shoot guy because Dante Exum was playing. People are forgetting that part of the equation. They're like, what are they going to do? Tim Hardaway. It's not even about that. Kidd now has the flexibility because he can make this roster any kind of way. He has the flexibility. Tim, you're not on tonight? Guess what, dog? It's not your night. Dante, step up. You can do this. Josh Green, you can do this. PJ, guess what? It's not your night. Well, guess what? Over here, Derek Jones Jr., you can step up. What? Wait a minute. Gaff, it's not your night? Derek Live, D-Fly, it's your night. This is what he didn't have before, and that's why a lot of people are saying, oh, my goodness, including different commentators. The Mavericks are going to be a shocking team in the playoffs.
Yeah, I don't
want to face that.
Legler, even Windhurst gave him a lot of credit.
So what happens is you lose a game that you could have won against Indiana, and Mavericks Twitter, which can be very toxic, all hell breaks loose. And I always want to blame the coach.
Right. And I do think that it is one game against a team that is good, and that I was hoping to see some of this team kind of stress test in various ways, so you learn about it. But I do think, like, when you mentioned the ideas, and when Jason Kidd mentions the ideas, that you have a lot of other guys that you hope add in. I think that's fair. The one question I asked, though, is, like, Tim Hardaway Jr. is going to take up a good amount of the, I guess, shots, right? And
not necessarily. That's why I was saying with Exum. See, this way, you just gave me some props by saying I pay attention to this team.
Sure.
So back in December, when everybody's watching Cowboys football, I'm watching Exum take over. and Kyrie's hurt. And Jason Kidd says, in my dream world, I want Dante, Kyrie, and Luka starting at the same time.
Yeah.
Why? Because you got 3 ball handlers now. Tim Hardaway Jr. is not a ball handler. He's a jump shot artist. So you're saying you need, no, you don't. You reduce his minutes if he's not on. If he's on, guess what? It's like Luka being on, you get him the ball. Just like Kyrie being on, give him the damn ball.
And I was getting there, but I do think that that's something that I'm going to want to see is that actual reduction, because they have not had the guys, to feel comfortable. At least it doesn't seem like they felt comfortable being able to have Tim, even if he's not shooting well, pull back on the minutes nearly as much or the shots as much because it felt like you needed him. I know some people have mentioned Jaden Hardy. Jaden Hardy has not seemed to play with the level of consistency where you feel.
This was so crowded. He, just like you're saying, he hadn't been doing it at the start of the year. Like, man, what happened to Hardy? They might have to trade him away. You hope you don't have to. You don't want him to develop somewhere else. Well, guess what? During this 7-game win streak, he started showing you some moments. So again, it's there, it's options. And this is the flexibility the kid's talking about. If somebody's not on, set your ass down. It's just that simple.
And so I think that's,
you used to could not be able to do that because of the injuries.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be now a point where a lot of people are focused on is how Jason Kidd utilizes the options that he has. And I thought this was an interesting game that kind of probed some of that out.
Here's the good part. You get to see these Pacers 1 week from tonight at the American Airlines Center in the rematch and see what they have learned from this lesson.
Yeah, that will be interesting. It'll be an entirely different challenge tomorrow evening when they play the Cleveland Cavaliers. It's not a jump shooting team, but a team with some length. Physical team, defensively inclined team. So again, another opportunity to stress test the new look Mavs. Just a 1 loss, right?
Yeah, this shows the versatility of the roster. You're going to find out what they're made of. And Jason Kidd has said this a number of times, and people like to hear it when they're winning. When they're losing, they don't like to hear it. He says the regular season is a test for the playoffs. It allows the coaching staff to take a look at guys who you want to count on or not, who can handle it, who you want in certain situations, and who you can say, well, wait, they'll work their way out of it. I can see the tendencies. Or, nah, hell, he can't handle this. Set your ass down. Whatever it is, you find out that's what the regular season is all about. Unfortunately, because the NBA, you're watching it as it goes. Some guys, if they're not hurt, you can see what they got. Like the Exum thing. You know what I'm saying? Nobody thought they could do this with Exum. And all of a sudden, wait a minute, they found out about Exum. Wait a minute, they found out about Lively. That's why you have a regular season. You know you can count on Lively. You know you can count on Exum, but you couldn't have counted on them if Kidd never played them.